Welcome. My name is Jasmine Kamboj, and I'm a medical oncologist and hematologist in the state of Minnesota and your host for the day on Empowering Oncologists, a podcast brought to you by OncoDaily. Before we dive in, a disclaimer. The views shared on this podcast are an individual's and in no way are contributions from any institution, organization, or guidelines. For our session today, we have Dr. Sandip Patel. He is a professor in medical oncology at University of California, San Diego. In his free time, he likes to travel and play soccer. I have known him from our LDP class with ASCO, and I think he was the most vibrant of our group of 4 and our class of 16. Sandip, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thanks. Great to join you. I'd say the same for you. And I think my vibrancy is purely related to my home time zone compared to the rest of our class.
That's funny. Sandip, tell us about your journey and how did you end up at UC San Diego?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I grew up outside of Houston, Texas, in a suburb called Sugar Land. And I, did research over the summer, Baylor, MD Anderson, eventually actually came back to Baylor for medical school. Left, wanted to leave like most high schoolers do. So I went to Duke for my undergraduate, really became interested in oncology, even in high school over some of these summer camps. And it kind of only doubled down as I started to do more clinical as an undergraduate. Wanted to check out other parts of the country, wanted to come out west. So did my residency out at UCLA, learned a lot, really kind of discovered my passion for immunotherapy. This is kind of the early days when it never worked. So got that UCLA, met my wife there. She's a physician as well. And so we went out east, kind of couples matched back to Duke. And then she being from Southern California, we were looking for positions really kind of in this area. And UCSD had a really wonderful role for kind of phase 1 in thoracic oncology, which was up my alley. And that's where I'm here.
That's a really good point to pivot on to our next question. Sandip, you are co-leader for the Solid Tumor Therapeutics program and experimental therapeutics. Tell us what does that entail?
Yeah, and so at NCI comprehensive cancer centers, typically they're divided into various programs. And the program I'm a part of and I co-lead along with 2 fabulous colleagues, Judy Varner and Jyoti Mayadev, is the Solid Tumor Therapeutics program, which has dozens upon dozens of members. And the goal really is to advance our cancer center goals, which are in some of the solid tumor catchment area priority tumors. So if you're an NCI cancer center, there's certain tumors that you have more of. If you're in North Carolina, you may have more lung cancer. Here in San Diego, we have more, melanoma, for example, gastric cancer, and never smoking lung cancer, interestingly enough. And so we try to structure educational activities, training, grants, facilitate research, really bench to bedside to the community for those tumor types. So within our program, for experimental therapeutics, that's the name for our phase 1 program. So kind of a pan solid tumor program. I do phase 1 in thoracic oncology, and I have colleagues who do GI, GU, and also a lot of the rare tumors, which don't kind of neatly fit into a disease team program in the rest of the cancer center. And so, that's really been an area I've been passionate about in terms of developing clinical trials for in rare tumors, for example, S629 DART. And it's been nice to be able to continue to take care of those patients.
Wonderful. So for a fellow or a trainee who wants to go into phase 1, how do they navigate their journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think phase 1 is all your internal medicine skills kind of dialed to 10 again, right? Because you just don't know the toxicity of the drug, right? It's alphanumeric soup. You know the mechanism of action, and you're giving a drug for the first time ever in a human, right? And so you may know what it does in a rat or a mouse or a monkey, but you have no idea what it's going to do. And so just the ability to kind of have your internal medicine kind of hat on, like your morning report, kind of differential diagnosis, because anything that can happen, unfortunately, sometimes does, I think is key. And so keeping that skill set up, I think, is important. Doing the rotations. If you're going to do phase 1, by and large, you still have a disease specialty home as well, because that really is the way the oncology world is divided, minus thoracic oncology. And so thinking about how you marry that, for me, that's really been around making cold tumors hot, right? And so trying to develop immunotherapy for those tumor types that typically immunotherapy doesn't work. And doing that with cell therapy based approaches. And so that's kind of my niche. And so the other thing to think about is, what do you want to be your area? If you're just going to do the next drug for everyone, you don't really have a focus. And so really kind of focusing, what do you want to develop in, what can help your population, the types of patients you can see, and then thinking kind of broadly. For us, I work with a lot of the specialists, because when they get a toxicity that's unknown, you kind of have to have your go-to person there, because as many folks may be aware, at some places, if someone has cancer, people aren't as aggressive on pursuing these diagnoses. But my point is, this is something that we were trying to help them with, and it was done to them by us. We have to try to, think outside the box to find the solution.
Right. So collaboration is very important there.
So,
Sandip, you are the lead on the NRG's Developmental Therapeutics Committee. What does NRG Oncology mean? Tell us, walk us through this whole process of NRG.
Yeah, so NRG is one of the NCTN groups, which defining an acronym with another acronym is probably not the best thing for me to do. But basically, the cooperative group mechanisms, there are 4 big cooperative groups, and NRG is one. And so I co-lead the Development Therapeutics program with Dr. Stephen Lind, who's an MD Anderson, a radiation oncologist. And so a natural question is, why is there a medical oncologist on a radiation oncology predominant committee? And it's because a lot of the novel combinations that we would utilize, for example, PD-1 inhibitors, right? For a while, that was a novel combination, though now I think it's blasé, and most people have done it in the standard of care in spades. But think about other targeted therapy combinations, concepts with novel therapeutics, how we can add radiotherapy, because the better our systemic agents are and our systemic control, really the more important understanding these combinations with radiotherapy are, because then we can actually utilize those ablative approaches, whether it be radiation, interventional radiology or surgical, because there's only 1 or 2 spots that are resistant left.
So basically, it's a collaborative effort between medical oncology, radiation oncology, and I believe also GYN oncology as well, for the NRG group as a whole. So
absolutely,
Yeah. How are cooperative group trials different from industry or pharma trials, Sandip?
Yeah, and so cooperative group trials, and there's foundation trials, which kind of are maybe in between, really are driven by the scientific priorities of the member NCTN organization, but also the National Cancer Institute, and really try to answer questions that pharmaceutical industry studies really wouldn't be able to. Because of lack of interest, for example, like rare tumor studies, niches, or just lack of power, right? It's going to be a large study in sarcoma, right? And so you need multiple different sites to kind of make that work. And you need group expertise. The other thing NCTN groups are really good at is ensuring a junior faculty is paired with a senior faculty. I think it's effectively a bylaw that any of these studies is a junior faculty leading it, mentored by a senior faculty. And I think that's something that's really important, because that's how you get the next generation into these types of studies. The other angle is the translational aims are very important for these studies. I think one myth I'd like to say is that these aren't studies that predominantly accrue at the academic mothership. In fact, many of the accruals for these studies are in community settings. So one thing that surprised me about S69 DART, I thought rare tumor patients would be knocking predominantly at the doors of, like a UCSD or a Mayo or a place like that. But in fact, when we looked at the data, almost 2/3 of the patients were treated at community settings.
Wow.
In the outreach sites for these cooperative groups. We call them LAPs, lead academic sites, program sites. And so they collaborate with community sites and work together, and the patients are actually treated there. So really trying to get these trials to where the patients are, I think, has been really something smart the NCTN has done.
Right.
But just understanding the impact that you have to go where the patients are. They can't drive all the way into the city 2 hours every week, and making sure the trials are available, then I think is really important.
That is fascinating conversation, Sandip. So I actually did not realize that the cooperative groups have such an impact, not only by asking the right scientific question that impacts patient care directly, but also in creating this next generation of researchers by training junior faculty by providing them mentorship. That is awesome. Thank you. Sandip, you're a researcher at heart, right? And clinical trial process has only gotten cumbersome over the years. What do you have to say about trial complexities and all the cost and regulatory burden that you and your team has to face while designing trials? And what are some of the solutions you propose to bring on?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a much needed question. The complexity of studies, especially phase 1 clinical trials, has exploded. The number of assessments that are required for a clinical trial, even frankly, the number of inclusion-exclusion criteria, which don't really relate to the proposed mechanism of action of the drug, are a big problem. And there are a lot of patients who could potentially benefit who aren't able to get access to treatment because of kind of these overly strict inclusion-exclusion criteria. And then once you get a patient on the study, the number of assessments required. If you have a drug that has no preclinical cardiac toxicity and preclinical experiments had really no cardiac issues, the mechanism isn't expected to affect cardiac tissue. Why are we getting triplicate EKGs, every couple minutes, right? We're really overdoing it, not really to the benefit of our patients. And time toxicity is a form of toxicity. We talk about medical toxicities, which are the most important in phase 1 clinical trial. We talk about social determinants of health, right? And financial toxicities.
Right.
But time toxicity, if you're there just to be watched, right, and you have advanced metastatic cancer, is that meaningful? It's one thing if you're getting a cell product, right, where you can get, SCRS or ICANS. It's another if you're getting, a small molecule, right? And so I think thinking about how we can be more elegant about designing these studies, more with remote monitoring, maybe a couple of the visits are at the mothership, but most of the visits are local, utilizing technology to monitor patients where they are, making sure they're safe to do that, I think is going to be key. But we're going to have to utilize artificial intelligence for a lot of the data entry. It's really gotten out of hand, the number of elements that need to be collected. And I know this is something you and I have partnered to work on, because if trials are thought to just be for a subset of patients that can make it to kind of urban enclaves, we've not really done justice in terms of delivering on the discoveries that are being made at many of these universities to the patients, that we can't bring them closer. And I think some of those guardrails are built a little too high artificially, in my view. Well, what's your thoughts? You've worn hats, you wear multiple hats in this regard.
You bring in a lot of great points. My role in research has been more of a utilization of hub and spoke model. And I have had patients that we managed using telemedicine remotely. So I was not the PI, but I was the site PI, and we would use hub and spoke for those patients. We also work very closely with our mothership, which is Rochester, in terms of collaboration between my little clinic and Rochester, and where we will send patients there and we will manage them locally with labs, imaging, and clinical follow-ups as well. So to your point, to some extent, we're doing those things, but not embracing them universally. And that is where I think the field needs to move in. AI, I have personally not used AI, but I think that's the next big thing in town, right? So, I think the field is...
You nailed it, Jasmine. AI to abstract all that information, your poor coordinator has to manually enter, right? Ambient AI for the notes and all the clinic visits. I think these are on deck.
100%.
In our LDP project, we were talking, when you're doing a site feasibility, what's your CAT scanner? What's your MRI scanner? Are the personnel doing the CAT scan and MRI at that satellite delegated? As if we're not seeing hundreds of patients with cancer and making those decisions day to day.
Right.
Because only, a couple companies. And so the amount of unnecessary paperwork that's been a barrier to getting sites out there, and I think we proposed some solutions. I think has gone out of hand. Now, can you do a phase 1 cell therapy study remotely? No, you can't, right? Or first in human. But could you do a phase 3? Could you do a phase 4 of an oral closer to home, mail the drug, monitor them remotely? you should be able to, and you don't
Yeah.
need to, look at every single aspect of everything if you know a couple key details. And so I think we got to reduce the burden for sites. We got to reduce the
Right.
burden for patients. We got to reduce the burden for staff.
Absolutely.
And I think some of that is self-inflicted interpretations, regulations, and then some of that is, we enter something in Microsoft Word, print it out as a
Right.
PDF, and enter it in Excel, basically. And we got to
Right.
streamline that so it's less human intensive, so we can focus on the things that really matter, which is our kind of face-to-face patient interactions.
Those are some really good points. And to your point, time toxicity is a big deal. And one of the other things I think we discussed in our LGP class was like how cumbersome and redundant this process has become, requiring a lot of extra staff. And I think staffing shortages was one of the key barriers to access to clinical trials, specifically in community and rural settings. So your points are well taken. I think we've already talked about, one of the things I think we came across as an LGP project was ASCO's work on clinical trial access, where it was really eye-opening data that 70% U.S. counties don't have access to clinical trials, and that is just 90% adult patients are not participating in clinical trials. That needs to change. Sandy, your comments on inclusion-exclusion criteria and how exhaustive they are, and what's their goal really? Like, why do we have such exhaustive inclusion and exclusion criteria for a clinical trial?
Well, I think a lot of it is pseudo-selection for the absolute healthiest patients. So the fundamental question is, are the patients there for the trial, or is the trial there for the patients, right?
Right.
If the patients are there for the trial and you're just trying to get the cleanest data, then you're going to exclude a lot of folks who'd benefit.
Yeah.
And your accrual rate's going to be slow. And it's not really a representative population, because guess what? In the real world, those are the patients that are going to get treated, and you have a huge gap in what your data looks like. And so the trials really are there for the patients. And so anytime we're doing an IIT, we look at every kind of inclusion exclusion criteria, and if it doesn't make sense, we throw it out.
Right.
And I think it's important because you get in a lot of trouble with these criteria if you just kind of copy and paste them. You exclude a lot of patients that will benefit, and that has negative impacts not only on the patient, but just on the overall field, the accrual rates. Just the amount of paperwork to even get a patient on, because each of those inclusion exclusion criteria usually requires an intervention. You got to get an echocardiogram, you got to get a pulmonary function test, and that's just pushing the patient further and further out. And if it takes a month for them to get unnecessary tests, in my opinion, in some cases, versus going on that next line of standard of care treatment in a week, without all those accoutrements, guess what everyone does? It's cancer, right? They're going to go on the standard of care treatment. So we're our own worst enemy sometimes, and we let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I get it. If you're doing a CAR T study, you are going to, do a mini transplant workup. But if you're doing a small molecule, do you really need, all these EKGs, these echoes, pulmonary function testing for asymptomatic healthy patients? I don't think so. And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice.
Right.
And remember, they're limited staff. So how many you're using limited staff to do things they may not need that to actually do to benefit folks.
Pivoting to your fellow of ASCO status. So you recently got the FASCO status. Congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Clearly, you've been super engaged with ASCO in different activities. What are you most proud of?
FASCO and ASCO's organization is really all about developing folks. And I've been very fortunate to be able to work with ASCO, as a fellow, junior faculty, now mentoring folks, my own fellows, right, and trainees in the organization. And so for me, I've gotten a lot of ASCOs. So the question is, how can I really, kind of give back and pass forward, right? And so, as I serve on committees, just trying to find folks, who will be the next generation, driving things forward, either, from our LDP class, other LDP classes, through the various organizations. But I think most proud of putting together educational programs around topics that otherwise I worry wouldn't get an audience. So for example, this upcoming ASCO, I'll be discussing some of the AI in clinical trials, and it'll be with one of my co-faculty are from Friends of NIH and the FDA. So it's a multidisciplinary look, a group of folks who often you don't see together in the same room, giving different angles on how we could try to help patients. And so that's what I really like about ASCO is it brings really diverse voices together and folks who otherwise don't get a chance to interact on a really kind of level set playing field, so folks can ask their questions and hopefully we have meaningful interactions to drive things forward. And so what I really like about ASCO is not only the development aspect, but just bringing together folks kind of in the common pursuit of trying to find new ways of fighting cancer for our patients.
That is great. One of my personal agendas for this ASCO annual meeting is to attend as many AI-related panel discussions and presentations as I can.
You could just ask ChatGPT the summary of all of them.
Wonderful.
Actually, the model is trained years ago, so it'd miss it. But yeah.
What is one advice you would give to Sandip Patel of 10 years ago?
Try to invest in NVIDIA and buy Bitcoin. No, I'm kidding. So I think no, don't do crypto. So I think it would really be about. I think there's I had a youthful. I probably still do. Maybe restlessness, right? And you always think things have to go a certain way, A to B to C, and you always think it has to be linear, like you're, progressing in a video game. But it turns out, some years you're going to knock it out of the park, and sometimes things just don't go your way, and you take a couple steps backwards. But it's a chance to regroup, chance to focus on your priorities, and a chance to kind of figure out what you want to do. I think there's a myth that there's an expectation that folks should be able to do everything. And I think, all of us, right, whether it be, undergrad, med school, resident, fellow, you try to do everything. And as a faculty, you can't. There's specialization. There's only a certain amount of time. You got to find what your niche is and may not be your mentors, right? And that's okay. But I think understanding that the game is not linear, so to speak, and it's not every 6 months you level up and you get something and things come in waves, good and bad. And you just got to ride the wave would be, besides stock tips, what I tell myself, or giving Biff's almanac to, like Back to the Future style.
That is really impressive. Yeah, game is not linear. And it's so good that you say that we need to learn to embrace disappointments and reflect and slow down sometimes to just reset our priorities for life.
Oh, yeah. That is so You're cool. Right. If you're not disappointed ever, you're not trying hard enough at stuff, right? You're not getting out of your comfort zone. And so your highs are only as high as the risk you're willing to take on your lows sometimes.
Absolutely. Pivoting on to some rapid fire questions for you, Sandip. What's your favorite book?
So Recency Effect. The book I'm reading that I really like right now is The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. I'm a parent and I have learned a lot about myself, I think, in thinking about it, and even my own journey. I think, we're Gen X, Jasmine, I think. And so we grew up with this stuff, but we weren't surrounded by this stuff 24/7. And sorry, I shouldn't. The book's premise is that younger kids are just constantly online with smartphones and other devices. And so they never get a chance to disconnect and kind of have the natural play cycles. And it's actually, it talks about folks, in Silicon Valley, they don't let their kids touch this stuff, right? So it's almost like this like drug dealing mentality, right? You don't get high on your supply. So that's the most recent book. Probably all time, there's several. I am impartial to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, though. How about yourself?
Well, so I started Anxious Generation, actually. Never did finish it. I just find the name of the book a little judgmental. Because I'm an optimistic and I'm a believer, Sandip. So I do agree with the problems that he has highlighted in the book. But at the same time, I'm like, if we just keep going in a vicious cycle about venting around the problems, it's not going to help our kids, So, but I mean, which book am I reading?
The second half is about the intervention, just to be fair, right? And so really the intervention is like, you don't give them smartphones. So in high school, which actually a lot of school districts are doing, like that kind of stuff. But you're right. It describes a problem. And the problem fundamentally, you got to look in the mirror, right? It's so much easier for me to hand the kid an iPad than to handle the issue or let the kid handle their own issue. And I think for me, if it's judgmental, it's as judgmental to the parents as it is the child. But I get some points,
Yeah. So the book that I'm reading right now is called Ikigai, which is about, the Japanese art of living, which I'm really enjoying that. It's a very simple, short book. But the one that I'm really planning to read and looking forward to that, I think it's called ADHD is Fun. I just came across that name because I feel like all of us to some level have ADHD. And apparently it's a book written by somebody who has ADHD. And he's talked about it in a very non-judgmental, very insightful sort of a way. So I'm looking forward to that book.
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, your favorite leader?
I think George Washington. I think everyone wanted him to be king. He could have been king, and he said no. And that it's very hard to be offered power and to decline it.
Right.
And to do that, especially after you certainly earned it, I think I have to go with George Washington.
Yeah, wonderful. Your favorite non-thoracic cancer study?
Non-thoracic cancer study.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think I'm always a fan of studies that address a population that otherwise, wouldn't have been addressed. And so some of these like phase ones that really had an impact were like these PD-1 studies that just grew on and on and on. They don't even allow them anymore. But if you look at, like Keynote 001, which is like the pan-tumor pembrolizumab study, you basically had, I forgot how many tumor types by the time it was over. Or if you looked at S609 DART, we had 53 cohorts with Ipi-Nivo by the time it was over.
Very cool.
I'm a fan of those studies that try to do something across multiple populations where initially you wouldn't have thought of it. And so, maybe those, but sorry to name one of your own, which is like, voting for yourself on a ballot kind of thing, which is never good.
Very cool. Your favorite restaurant in San Diego?
I like the taco truck scene downtown, or the restaurants that come from there. So if you're ever near the convention center, you can take a walk to Tacos El Gordo, which used to be a hole in the wall, but now is not.
Yeah.
But I like that aesthetic, and it's very San Diego.
Yeah, very cool. And your favorite soccer team?
Oh, well, besides my kids, soccer teams.
You can say your kids are your favorite soccer team.
Okay, then that's all I need to say, because I don't want to tune out if the Champions League is going and everyone's mad, or the World Cup is going.
How old are you boys again now?
10 and 6. Yeah.
10 and 6. Okay, good deal.
But the honest answer is I studied abroad in Barcelona as a college student. Yeah. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I went to a random Barcelona game, and it was the debut of a player who was little known at that time, but he was a short player by the name of Lionel Messi. Turned out to be pretty good at soccer. So, no, I do have a very soft spot for Barcelona from that. Yeah.
We were buying cleats yesterday, and the Messi T-shirt is selling at $110.
The Inter Miami one? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I see that everywhere.
All right. So a fun fact about Dr. Patel, which he did not share with me, but I will share with our audience because we work together as the LDP class, is that do you prefer to drink coffee or Diet Coke in the morning?
Well, Coke Zero. I have very bad habits, and I have a very bad habit, and Coke Zero is my bad habit. I'll drink coffee if I don't have any Coke Zero.
All right. My last question for you, Sandip. If you were to relive your life, would you choose oncology again?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's not a day that goes by. I mean, we all have our bad days. I have my bad days. We all have good days. But at the end of the day, I never question the meaning of what we do, right? And I never have to, is it worth it to spend this much energy on? What else would I spend? I mean, maybe other health issues, right? But I mean, these are fundamental. It's a very human problem. It's a very scientific problem, and it's a very important problem. And so I think absolutely. And I think if I weren't going to do this, I'd probably focus on if cancer didn't exist, which would be great. I'd probably find the next biggest killer and work on cardiovascular disease or stroke or something. That's part of the reason I did lung cancer. In addition to phase 1, is these patients didn't have a ton of options, though now we have a lot more for these patients. But it was the biggest killer is a stigmatized disease. And so, I want to kind of jump right into it. And so, I think cancer, and I imagine the answer may be the same for you too, Jasmine, no?
100%. 100%. So far, every single guest that I've had has had the same answer. The reasons are described in a slightly different fashion, but the answer is yes, 100%. All right, Sandip. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to our viewers and listeners. The three key takeaways from Dr. Patel's conversation today. Number one, the cooperative groups are accruing a lot of patients in the community, so we need to be mindful of that. In addition to asking the right scientific questions that will impact our patient care directly for cancer patients, they also allow us good mentorship opportunities and train the next generation of researchers and trialists. Number two, while devising clinical trials, I think it's high time we start paying attention to time toxicity in addition to the drug toxicity and financial toxicity for our patients. Things like remote monitoring, hub and spoke model, and for sure AI utilization as a tool for simplifying data entry are some of the proposed solutions to the current ongoing issues. Number three, I really liked how Dr. Patel described we have to start asking ourselves, is the patient there for the trial or is the trial there for the patient? And definitely is the trial there for the patient, and that's how we need to change our mindset going forward. That is all, folks, for today. This is Jasmine Kamboj and Sandip Patel signing off on behalf of OncoDaily from our conversation today on Empowering Oncologists. Thank you.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to OncoDaily on YouTube. Hit the bell icon to stay updated.